Today's entitled Women Search for Attention and Validation often leads them onto Highway 304, the cheater's highway. Please like and subscribe. Exit 13. The gift that keeps giving. Wife's search for attention and validation leads her down a scary path. Today's entitled women in their search for attention and validation find themselves on Highway 304, the cheater's highway. Claire had married John over 20 years ago. When she started dating John after her last year of college, she knew that he was not the kind of man that her friends would find exciting. It's not that he was boring, but John would rather be outside having fun in the Louisiana wilderness than going to Shreveport bars, clubs, or parties. After dating Claire for 3 years, John asked her to marry him. Before she accepted, he had only one thing to ask. "Never cheat on me," John asked. From their time together, she knew that he had been married before, and wife one cheated on him. Left him without a word. He came home to an empty apartment. No furniture, nothing except his clothes. He never really spoke about how he dealt with the loss, but his friends, Mud and Jeff, told a different story. In hushed tones, they spoke that John had almost been a vigilante against cheaters, dealing a wrath against those that openly cheated on their loved ones, before he finally burned it out of his system. Claire found this hard to believe. John was sweet and loving. They were just trying to scare her with the stories. "Never cheat on me," John stated. Without hesitation, she accepted his proposal. Now 20 years later, John thought that he and Claire had a wonderful marriage, and for the most part, they did. John didn't believe in wasting money, especially on things like gym memberships. He exercised in their garage every morning, and rode their exercise bike every night before bed. Though no one would call him ripped, John was toned and fit. On nice days, he would ride his bicycle to work and back. The outdoors called to him. He loved to hunt and fish, but he was not the kind of man to take off work to do so. Hunting and fishing had to be done on his time off. Supporting his family was more important than reckless spending on hunting and fishing gear. Over the last 2 decades, Claire had aged as well. The 3 children that she birthed left her with wider hips and fuller bustline. She was active, and though 20 pounds heavier than when she married, she liked that she kept a trim waistline to go with her wider hips. With work and 3 teenagers' activities, she kept busy. She walked every day during her lunch hour with her work friends, Emma and Kay. The 3 had worked together for a decade. Claire went back into the workforce after her youngest started to pre-K. Though she was girl next door cute, Claire was never called beautiful by anyone other than John. John liked Emma and Kay's husbands when they hung out together. Ralph, Kay's husband, had a wandering eye. Though he never said anything, John didn't trust Ralph with his wife, and always kept an eye on him. After being cheated on, John watched every man that interacted with his wife. Trust, but verify was his favorite motto. He couldn't be too careful. He was thankful that he didn't have a daughter to watch out for. He felt blessed to have 3 strong sons. Early in their marriage, camping trips with the boys were a family event, but as the boys got older, Claire complained about tent camping on the hard ground. Her idea of camping became a night in a motel. Over the last year, Claire began to beg off on the family camping trips, even though John offered to buy a camper to use in place of their old tent. After a few robberies in their area, like many of the neighbors, John put in a ring door camera to watch the front of the house, and a wireless solar camera in their backyard. The cameras made him have a talk with their oldest son about sneaking out at night when he thought mom and dad were sleeping. After a while, people seem to forget about the cameras as they go about their life. Unknown to John, things were changing in Claire's friend group. Kay began to regale Emma and Claire with tales about open relationships and open marriages. It seems that Ralph and she were beginning this experiment called open marriage. How the 2 of them had posted to dating sites, and each were in the early stages of messaging and speaking with interested others. Emma wanted to know why Ralph and Kay didn't become swingers. Her response was that they didn't want to be intimate with people that they know. Claire found that amusing. Not being intimate with people that they know, told Claire that one or both of them was interested in having sex with someone that the couple knew. She felt pleased with herself that the someone might be her. She had always enjoyed flirting with Ralph. She knew that she would not cross any lines with Ralph, but she did like his attention. Emma and Claire found themselves fantasizing that it was them in Kay's tales, instead of Kay. Over the next few months, Kay told them about kissing and touching new men, and going home to tell Ralph about it. How turned on Ralph became, and how they would mate like rabbits afterward. For some reason, Kay never spoke about how jealous she became when Ralph told her about his dates. One morning, Kay found Emma and Claire before work started. She was so excited to tell them about her first extramarital encounter. It was the best sex that Kay had ever had. He was so much better than Ralph, and she couldn't wait to do it with him again. As the months passed, Claire found herself getting excited as she listened to Kay's adventures. Many times, after Kay's sexual adventure tales, Claire had to go clean herself in the ladies' room. Sometimes, she relived Kay's adventures while being intimate with John. John was benefiting from Kay's stories, and he didn't know it. John and Emma's husbands knew nothing about Kay's and Ralph's open marriage arrangement. Ralph never spoke of it, and the ladies did the same. Everyone knew where John stood on infidelity. To be honest, John didn't communicate with the other husbands except when the girls wanted to get together. He had asked the other two husbands to go fishing with him, and the boys. The boys were Mutt and Jeff, not his sons. For some reason, John knew that he didn't want his sons around Ralph. Ralph made his hackles rise. Claire's downfall began innocently. John took their sons on an overnight camping trip to catch a few trout, and she asked off. She wanted to go shopping with her girls. While John and his sons sat around a campfire, Claire sat drinking wine with her friends and their husbands at Kay and Ralph's house. After her third glass of wine, Claire needed the restroom. As she walked down the hallway toward it, Ralph followed behind. As she closed the door, Ralph pushed it open and entered. Taking Claire into his arms, Ralph kissed her. Deep and passionate, they kissed. Ralph's hands roamed her body as they continued. He squeezed her bottom and continued upward to her bosom. She didn't stop kissing him, but she tried to keep his hands from roaming her body. Though she didn't stop him, she also didn't discourage him either. She would never say that she liked it, but she was excited. She loved to be kissed, and this felt naughty. After what seemed like an eternity, Ralph pulled away and smiled at her. He opened the door and quietly exited. She glanced at her watch, and only 2 minutes had passed. After doing her business, she refreshed herself in the mirror before exiting the bathroom. She felt so nasty and excited. She would have never dreamed that she would be so turned on by another man. Ralph was nothing like her husband. Ralph was not fit like John, but he was attractive with his salt and pepper goatee. He looked a little slimmer since they opened their marriage. She liked how he had taken charge. Ralph and Claire slipped away 3 more times during the evening, where they kissed and Ralph touched her body over her clothes. Claire didn't touch Ralph anywhere but his arms and his back. She felt flushed as they made out like teenagers. Her flushed face was noticed by Kay, who was quick to question if Claire was feeling ill. How her face looked feverish. Gathering Claire's things, Kay escorted Claire to her car. Kay had noticed her husband kept disappearing throughout the evening. She was nobody's fool. She knew her husband was breaking the one rule of their open marriage. No friends or people each knew. Alone at home, Claire laid in bed, thinking about how excited she had been that evening. She understood Kay's excitement about hooking up with other men. As she tried to sleep, Claire fantasied about men that interested her. Ralph had ignited something within her. Outside of snogging, she didn't think that she could do anything else with Ralph. Nothing intimate, anyway. Well, maybe once. Over next few weeks, Claire was able to put the urge to cheat out of her mind because her life was hectic. The boys had finals and baseball tournaments every weekend. She looked forward to the end of the school year, when it would only be baseball practice and summer games. Claire knew that she will beg off the games on the scorching days of summer, but John would still be there for the boys. The weekend before Memorial Weekend, John took the youngest son to his baseball tournament that was hosted 100 miles away. They would be spending the night. The two older boys went to the lake overnight with friends, leaving Claire at home alone. She invited her friends over for the evening so she would not be alone. 2 bottles of wine and 3 hours later, Emma and Claire listened intently to Kay's tales of carnal knowledge. Kay enjoyed watching her friend's eyes as she told her tales. They were mesmerized. She watched as Claire would lightly touch her body in various places as she listened to the tales. Claire obviously wanted to touch more intimate places, but wouldn't do that in front of her friends. Kay found herself feeling excited as well. "Come on, ladies, we're going out," Emma responded first. "Kay, it's late. It's after 10, she laughed her answer to Emma. "Girl, at the bar, after 10 is the best time for finding a man." It seemed that Emma was the only one concerned about going out. "What if my husband finds out? I'm not telling him." "Claire, are you going to tell Joe?" Kay asked Clara. Claire nodded a no. "But we don't have any nightclub clothes," Emma stated. Kay pulled Emma and Claire up from the couch where they sat. "Men don't care about what we're wearing. As long as we have boobs and vaginas, we have what they need. Jeans and t-shirts are fine, but ladies, we're losing the bras." As Emma seemed to place her arms across her chest in response. "But everyone will know that we're bra-less." Laughter came from Kay. "That's the point." In the darkness of the motel room, John saw the glow of his phone screen lighting up in the side pocket of his backpack. Fearing an emergency, he entered his passcode. It was a message from his doorbell camera. He was afraid of an intruder with his wife at home alone. John clicked on the app to watch the video. What he saw was 3 very tipsy women playing grab ass as they stumbled around his front porch. It looked like his wife was wearing one of his youngest son's t-shirts. It was very tight on her, and he knew the look of her chest was without any support. At one point it was right in front of the camera. He replayed the video a few times. He grimaced as he watched the women give each other nipple twisters as they laughed before he watched the women get into Kay's Camry and drive away. He thought about packing up the motel room and heading home. He didn't want to see his boys motherless because she was in a drunk diving accident. He paused. As far as he knew, the girls hadn't done this before. He would give his wife the benefit of doubt. Even though they looked like they were going bar hopping, he would hope that maybe they were just going for food, or maybe to the liquor store for more wine. John would let his son sleep, but he didn't sleep much at all. His concern for his wife's well-being was his priority. If only he had known about Kay's open marriage. Claire would not know that this night was planned by Kay. Kay planned this evening to make sure that if Claire wanted to have another man, then she would make sure that man was not her husband, Ralph. As the women entered Dodgers, a local dive bar known for its rowdy crowd, Claire felt out of place. Every eye in the place, from the men and women inside the bar, watched them. They were new, outsiders. Claire was aware that most of the men were staring at her chest. She knew the cool night air left her with headlights on high beam. The music was loud, and the bar was smoky. The clientele was rough and rowdy, and a little unsavory. The men were not pretty boys wearing designer suits, and went to the gym every day. These men were hard-working, hard-living types. Some were attractive in a different way than she normally thought about. Maybe it was the alcohol, but she was feeling super attractive compared against the other women in the bar. As they sat in a booth by the back window, it wasn't long before the men showed them attention. By midnight, there were 4 men vying for the 3 women's attention. A burly, heavy-set man with a bushy beard, that said his name was Jim, kept putting his hands on her thighs under the table. She had given up stopping him from rubbing her crotch on the outside of her jeans. Evidently, she needed the restroom. Jim walked her to the restroom. Claire was surprised when Jim came inside the restroom with her. He pushed her against the restroom's dirty tile wall, and shoved his tongue into her mouth. Claire had never kissed a bearded man before, but it didn't stop her from kissing him back. He mauled her bra-less chest as they kissed. Before she knew it, he had her jeans and panties off. She didn't touch his body except to hold on to his shoulders as Jim had his way with her. She found this exciting, and she was sad when it was over so quickly. It wasn't until he fastened his pants, and walked out of the restroom, that she realized what she had done. She had never really thought about cheating on her husband, yet she had. She didn't even try to stop Jim, she allowed everything that happened. Her thoughts of her grandfather's old saying, "If you're looking for trouble, trouble will always find you." An ashamed Claire cleaned herself up, and crept outside to wait for an Uber. The cool night air helped her realize what she had done. Part of her was ashamed, felt guilty, but part of her loved it. The excitement of cheating, of doing things with a man not her husband, really turned her on. She sighed as the Uber driver pulled up beside her. The alert from the door camera came around 1:30 a.m. John watched the video. His wife got out of the back of a car. Probably an Uber, and she walked slowly to the front door. John sighed that she had arrived home safely. Over the next 3 months, Claire, Emma, and Kay went to bars, a different bar each week. The women soon found a group of men that frequented the bars as well. It started as friendly meeting before escalating to weekly dates. Each of the women had tasted each of the men, and one man stood out as all of their favorite. Rob was the best looking of the 3 men, but he knew his way with women. Since they were all married, the ladies chose to rotate Rob each week. Though Emma kept seeing one of Rob's friends when it wasn't her week for Rob, Claire decided to play the field. Claire experienced tall men, short men, white men, black men, Middle Eastern men, and one Hispanic man. If only there were more Asian men in the bars, then she could experience them too. By the end of the summer, Claire's encounters were in the double digits. For the end of the summer, John rented a cabin for a Labor Day weekend getaway for his family. No sleeping on the ground. He wanted his wife and sons together as a family. Their oldest was a senior this year, and college loomed only a year away. The morning of August 18th, John woke as he did every morning and made his way to the bathroom to drain the snake. He winced in pain as he urinated. The burning sensation alarmed him, but then he noticed a slight discharge from his member. His concern made John called in to work for a paid day off before getting dressed and driving to the urgent care center a few miles from his home. After being examined by the attending doctor, John was informed that the doctor felt that he had contracted a sexual transmitted disease. The office would call him after the tests were completed, if didn't want to wait. John wanted to wait. He needed to know. He could tell by the doctor and the nurses' faces that they didn't believe that he had only had relations with his wife, Claire. The nurse was persistent that she needed the names of everyone that John had been intimate with. His embarrassment became anger. The test results were positive for gonorrhea. It seems that his wife had infected him during the last 7 to 10 days, maybe 2 weeks at the most. He left with a prescription, and the promise to abstain for the next month to be safe. This was not the way that John had planned to spend his day off. As he drove home, the anger increased, as did the disappointment that he had in Claire, but he was mostly disappointed in himself for not noticing that Claire was cheating on him. His friends, Mud and Jeff, had given him a lot of crap of letting Claire go on girls' nights out. They told him that GNOs were a marriage killer. He didn't believe them until today. Claire closed the door to her very quiet house, and called out to anyone. "I'm home?" She heard John's familiar footsteps coming from the kitchen. He stopped in the doorway and stared. "Where are the boys?" she asked. "I sent them out to dinner, so we can be alone," John calmly stated. He sipped a cup of coffee before asking the question. "Who are you screwing?" Claire looked surprised. "I don't know what you're talking about." Claire struggled to take control of the discussion. "I would never do that, John. You're the man that I love. How could you ever think that I would cheat on you?" He stopped listening to her lies, and focused on the important part. His anger increased and increased. He marched towards her. Claire saw it in his eyes. He looked insane. As John continued towards her, she started backing up while telling him that she loved him, and to please settle down, but he kept coming saying over and over again, "Liar, liar, liar." Claire tried to run to the front door, but John grabbed her by the back of her sweater, and pulled backward her back towards him. Being a strong man, he easily lifted Claire off the floor, and pinned her against the wall with her feet dangling 2 feet off the floor. She was too scared to kick at him. "Names, you cheating bitch. Now, I don't know what you're talking about, John. Please, I'm scared, she cried. Holding her against the wall with his left forearm, John punched through the dry wall beside the left side of her face. Claire wet herself with fear. John noticed the urine as it soaked the legs of her jeans. Names? He asked again. When she didn't answer, John took his right hand and lightly grabbed Claire's throat and began to squeeze. The insane look in John's eyes scared her, but with the pressure increasing on her throat, Claire finally understood that he was going to end her if she didn't confess. He wasn't her forgiving, loving husband, he was a beast, a monster, and she was scared. She reached both of her hands to his right hand, as she tried to pull his hands from her throat. Her feet started to kick the air as John held her off the floor. Her feet connected with John's shins, but he didn't falter. The fear in her eyes must have touched the man within John, as he released the squeeze on her throat. He growled at her. Any last words? Tears ran down her cheeks. Why, John, I love you. John looked into her soul. Where what was once love was now a burning hatred. Claire saw that, and in her fear, she understood it. Claire was sure that she covered everything so John would never find out. Claire made sure to be intimate with her husband at least 2 to 3 times each week. She needed to turn this around, so she asked, "Why to think that I'm cheating on you?" He pressed his right hand back to her throat and prepared to squeeze. He simply stated, "Because you gave me the freaking clap," she panicked. How could she give him an STD? She had been careful, hadn't she? Honestly, she hadn't been careful at all. Once the alcohol kicked in, she wasn't very selective except when she was ordering off the menu for a night of fun. Tonight's going to be tall men. Or maybe some Middle Eastern was on the menu. Or maybe it was soul night menu tonight. On menu nights, she would usually sample 2 items from that night's menu. For comparison only. She was amused that she found out what the word average meant across her menu selections. As he increased the pressure, she felt her throat closing. Claire tried to tell him that she was sorry, but she could not get the words out. Though she was trying to fight his grasp, she felt her strength fading. As her arms collapsed to her sides, he released her throat. He threw her over his left shoulder like a bag of taters, and carried her to the kitchen table where a notebook and pen laid atop it. He placed her in the armchair that sat at the head of the table. He zip-tied her left wrist to the chair, and each of Claire's legs to the chair legs. He left her right arm free. He wanted her to document everything for him. As she felt stronger, she told him that she was sorry. He didn't seem to care about that. "Tell me everything," he firmly stated. "I want to know who it was, and if it was more than one, I want to know that too. I want their names, every frackin' name. I want to know every place that you F'd around on me at, and who it was." She hesitated. "Now, get started." John sat in silence as she wrote for most of an hour. Claire stopped and hesitated, trying to guess how she could minimize this. When she finished, she asked for a drink of water. He poured her some water in a styrofoam cup, and handed it to her. After sipping the cool water, she wanted to bare her soul, so Claire told him the story. How Kay and Ralph had an open marriage, and how Kay had regaled them with tales of her sexual hijinks. How Ralph had cornered her in the bathroom, and they began to kiss and touch, and it excited her to be doing something so naughty. How it escalated that first night in the bar. How she went dick crazy after her first extramarital intimacy. How she was addicted to it, and she kept increasing the thrill to feed the hunger within her. John didn't seem to be surprised. He reached for the notebook. "We're going to need this list of every one of your partners for the doctor's office." When he looked down, he frowned. Without counting, it looked like more than 20 names. "I don't see many last names." She looked down. "I don't know any of them." It wasn't important at the time. He couldn't believe how stupid his wife was. Having unprotected sex with men that she didn't even know their last names. What if one of them had hurt her? How could she go to the police? Glancing at the clock on the wall, John snarled a little. It was getting close to 8 p.m. He took his knife, and removed the zip ties from her left arm, and her legs. "Go get yourself dolled up, because I'm going hunting, and you're the bait." Her thoughts of conversations from Mutt and Jeff about John came to her mind. She had a bad feeling. John might get hurt because if he was going after her dates, then he could get hurt. Some of the men were bigger than John. As she went into their ensuite, Claire expected to have bruising on her throat, but there was none. He had applied only enough pressure to her windpipe to make her collapse, but not incur any bruising. She freshened her makeup, and came out into the bedroom where her husband waited. "You don't look sexy enough. Put on whatever you wore to seduce those men," he said. Claire couldn't put on what she wore because she kept those clothes at Kay and Ralph's house. She tried to explain that, but he didn't seem to care. "Make it happen," John argued. She went with some tight leggings, and a short summer sweater that showed cleavage. John nodded. "It'll work. Let's go." In his truck, John explained that they were going to go to every bar and nightclub to find any or all of the men that had been intimate with his wife. "You better hope that we find some of them." At the first bar, Claire saw two of the men. She feared what would happen, but she pointed out the two men to John. He told her to go talk to one of them, and bring him outside to the parking lot. If she warned him, then she would get what was coming to her boyfriend. She wanted to argue that he wasn't her boyfriend, but she was too scared to. When she opened the side door of the bar to go outside, she almost jumped out of her skin when John grabbed the man by his head and rammed the head into the security lamppost. The man's head bounced off the pole, and he fell backward onto the ground. John stomped on the man's crotch as hard as he could before knee dropping into his gut. Out of breath, the man had no fight in him. John zip-tied his hands and feet, and stuffed a dirty rag into his mouth. Picking the man up, John threw him into the back of the truck bed. Claire watched in fear. Why did John put the guy in the truck bed? "You better go get the other one." John nodded toward the bar entrance. As she opened the door for the second man, John was waiting with a tire iron. This beating went quicker, and soon the man joined his brethren in the truck bed. As they drove away from the bar, she sat in silence. She wanted to ask where they were going as John drove out the country. When they drove 20 miles to the swampy areas, he stopped and pulled the men from the back of the truck by their feet. The men each fought against his touch, but John hit them over and over again with the tire iron. He took each man's ID from their pockets and wrote down their names. John knew that the summer heat had driven any gators back with the receding waters, but snakes and other predators were nearby. The men were left 20 feet apart. "I'll be back later," John warned before getting in the truck and driving back to town. John and Claire did this 4 times that night. Tonight's hunt had captured 7 sexual predators. In the swamp, he looked at the 7 men. Each watched him. Their hands and feet tied, and the mouths gagged. They knew that they were helpless. He held a lantern in his left hand. He took a breath before speaking. "Each of you gave my cheating wife an FN. One of you gave her the clap which she gave to me. You may have figured out that I am not happy about this predicament. I don't know if you city boys know this, but snakes are attracted to light." He turned on the lantern, and sat it on the ground. Then, he got in his truck and drove away. No police came for him. It seemed that the men couldn't tell on him, because like Claire, they didn't even remember her first name, and probably didn't know her last name for sure. It took John and Claire almost a month to get all of the men. He had everyone's names, and addresses for the health department. It seemed that all of the men were able to get out of the swamps alive, as best that he could tell. He hoped that they enjoyed the 20-mile hike back to town. The only man to get an excessive beating was good old Rob. The best choice of the 3 women. Rob probably would never sire any children, and he definitely wasn't a pretty boy anymore. The public humiliation from the health department for Claire was a bit excessive. The officials weren't nice. Claire had started an epidemic. Besides her husband, Claire gave the STD to 3 other men, including Rob. Rob gave it to Emma and Kay. Emma gave it to at least 5 men, and Kay gave it to Ralph, who gave it to the 4 other women that he was seeing, and the 3 regular partners and 8 strangers. Over the month that John worked to find his wife's lovers, the number of infected people grew and grew until the local Department of Health had to publicly acknowledge an outbreak, and warn the general population of the county. The alert from the health department became a joke to most of the community. where men and women would call each other out when someone said they were stopping for drinks on the way home. "Hey, don't you catch the clap on the way home," was a favorite joke. No one at Claire's work seemed to notice that she would withdraw and look down whenever someone made that joke. If they only knew that she was the one that started the epidemic. The formerly happy couple divorced. John and Claire quietly ended their marriage, and somehow maintained civility with each other for the sake of the boys. John moved his ex-wife to a nice apartment close to the house so she could be near her sons. Claire would always hope that someday, John would ask her to come home, but that would never happen. She had become a sexual addict, in a way that she never thought she would, and that addiction caused her downfall. Claire would not lead a secluded life, she needed the contact of other men. Claire learned 2 things after her divorce. 1. Always use protection. If he didn't want to, there were plenty of other men that would wear it for her safety, and 2. The majority of men interested in her only wanted sex. This led to a lot of lonely nights. She didn't want only a man to be intimate with, she wanted another John. A man that she'd be loved by, and do fun things with. John pledged to never marry again, and he remained celibate until all of the boys were out of the house, and on their own. He found that with the local women, he was somewhat a unicorn. Wherever he went, church, work, or local events, he would find female admirers. He found that even though he was 50, women found him interesting. He found women that were dinner companions, fun companions for hiking and fishing, and others that became friends with benefits. John found his life to become more interesting instead of lonely. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.